The number one way to inspire change in someone's life is by sharing your story. Imagine if your story was the one in a million that someone desperately needs to hear. I'm Devin Schubert, and I'm on a mission to share 1 million stories across social media. And I want your story. It's time to take your story to the stage. And now, here's one of those stories.
What do you do when your prayers don't get answered? And how do you go on when you really believed and trusted God for something and it didn't go the way you hoped? My name is Olivia Figuered. I am a married mom of 4 boys, all in different stages of life. I'm also a speaker, a mentor, and the host of the Peaceful Presence podcast. And I want to share a story with you today that I walked through in recent years. And I hope that it blesses you and allows you to know that if you're going through something that results in disappointment or devastation, that it's not the end, and it can actually be an invitation to the beginning of something new and good. On October 10th, 2023, I pulled up into my driveway, and just before pulling into the garage, I stopped and I stared into the sky and I began crying. But they were tears of joy, and I was thanking God for His goodness and for the miracle testimony that I was witnessing. I told Him we were going to share this testimony to the masses and that it was all going to be for His glory. I pulled into my garage and then I walked into my home, and I remember just being, full of joy and excitement because, it had been a really good day. But what I didn't know is that that night was the last time that I would ever say goodnight to my sweet sister and my very best friend, because the next day it was not a good day, and I had never seen her in pain like I did that day. My sister had been walking through a 2-year cancer journey, and in the summer of 2021, she started feeling like something was a little off and discomfort in her stomach. Nothing too alarming, but by September, her health had declined pretty rapidly. She could barely stand for more than 30 seconds. Walking from one room to the next left her winded. And after some challenges of getting into the doctors, because this was right after the pandemic, I remember getting a text that stopped me in my tracks. And I remember reading it while I was working on my computer, and I instantly felt sick to my stomach. She had stage 4 colorectal cancer, innumerable and inoperable tumors that were covering her liver. She had some small nodules that had formed in her lungs, and she was told that there was nothing that they could do. The cancer had spread pretty aggressively, and it wasn't even inside her colon. It had gone on the outside, which explained why a recent colonoscopy hadn't caught it. So everything just felt like it was unraveling. And I was so exhausted at this time. COVID had completely disrupted our world and mine as well. I had a 2-year-old at the time. My baby was born just after COVID. I had just moved schools with my children. I worked in the mortgage industry, and at a time where everybody else's life was slowing down because they were home and taking time off work, mine was so busy because everybody was home and they were refinancing and taking advantage of their equity and lower interest rates. And it was just such a busy time, and it went on for so long. And just as it started to slow down, I got this news about my sister. And during the day, I would push through like everything was fine. But then at night, when the house was quiet, I would just cry. I remember laying in bed and just crying. This was my sister. She was my best friend. She was the rock of our family. She was 9 years older than me. And at one point in my life, kind of felt more like a mother figure. I talked to her every day. We raised our kids together. I mean, we literally lived on the same street. We built houses at the same time. So we weren't just close in terms of a relationship, but in proximity too. I remember thinking, like, how could I drive on my street every day and pass her house and not have her be in it? So after a few nights of just crying and things falling apart, something inside of me rose up. I had always had a heart for Jesus. I I developed a personal relationship with him when I was 17. And while I had always prayed and believed, I knew I needed to go deeper now. So that's what I did. I got up every morning religiously around 4 a.m. without even an alarm, and I would go onto this special spot on the couch, open my Bible, and I would just press in. I Googled, healing scriptures, healing stories, testimony stories, and I just surrounded myself with nothing but those kinds of stories. My mom, my sister, and I were on a text message thread, and we would just constantly send each other inspirational scriptures, stories, anything that just uplifted us and gave us reason to believe and trust that we would have the miracle outcome that we were looking for. And in the beginning, we were all getting messages around having no fear. And one day I asked God to give me a confirmation for that. And it was a couple days later that I was changing my son's diaper on the floor, and I saw something under the couch. And it was this card from a game that my toddler had spread all of the cards on the living room floor a couple weeks earlier. And I thought I had picked them all up, but one card was left behind. And when I picked it up underneath the couch, I looked at that card, and the word on it was fear. And right underneath it was a circle with a line through it, kind of like that, no smoking sign. And I knew that was God saying, have no fear. And from that point forward, I walked in faith, not perfectly, but boldly. My sister rallied, and we had this big prayer gathering, and very quickly we turned to some unconventional protocols. She did wind up using some conventional as well, but her situation started turning around. And within, I would say, a couple of weeks, she was able to walk up her steep driveway once or twice a day. Her energy improved, her tumors were shrinking, and her numbers were all moving in the right direction. And so we just trusted we were going to get our miracle. And quite honestly, we had an amazing 2 years. Many times she would say if somebody didn't tell her that she had cancer, she would never have known. We took some family vacations during that time, and we just really, as much as our family was close, we just really rallied together and created some very special memories that will forever be ingrained in my heart. My faith grew so much during that season. I always joke that I used to unwind at night and I would fall asleep watching Dateline. And I never finished an episode. I'd always have to go back the next night and rewind it and see who murdered who. But something shifted in me during that time. I couldn't take the darkness or the negative stories anymore. I only wanted to take in stories of hope and healing and light. And I was changing. And so was she. And my faith became unshakable. But things changed. One of the tumors never fully went away, and it was pressing on all 3 major veins in her liver. And at one point, she was needing a procedure to reduce that pressure. And it was supposed to be an outpatient thing, but it wound up turning into sepsis, and one thing developed and turned into another. And it honestly became this roller coaster of complications, multiple hospital visits, pain, weakness, and then eventually it was hospice. But what I want to say is that even in that, I still had hope. No matter what came our way, I still had hope. When they said that she was going to go home on hospice, I said, good. I was tired of them opening her up, and I felt like every time they went in, things got worse. And I still had some things that I wanted to try at home, and I had hope. So, we got her home just where she wanted to be, and I had my list of things that I wanted to try. And I felt like we were, at a turning point. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was on October 10th that I spent the day at her house, and she was smiling. She had good energy. It looked like her swelling had gone down. Her spirits were high, and it felt like a turning point. It felt like what we were doing was working. And that was the night that I drove home and sat in my driveway and looked up and just gave God thanks through my tears of joy. But as I mentioned, I didn't know that that was the last time I would say goodnight to her, because the next morning, everything changed. She was in pain like I hadn't seen before, and her body was shutting down, and she could barely talk. Later that evening, she passed away. And even as I watched this happen, I still had faith. I was still calling her back. I was still believing. I had read during this time so many near-death experience stories that I still had hope. But she was gone, and I remember waking up the next morning feeling so confused. And I remember going to God and just saying, how could this be? Because we had so many signs during those 2 years. It wasn't just the no fear. There was multiple signs and confirmations along the way. I just felt so confused and so sad, obviously. And I know that during these moments, a lot of people, this is a moment where you question God, but not for me, because somehow, even in that moment, I had peace. I had what the Bible says, that the peace that surpasses understanding. It didn't make sense, but it was real and it held me. And in a way, I wanted to lean into God more than I ever did before. And that's what I did. I leaned in closer. I still had many questions. I still felt confused. I still do to this day. But I had to trust him. One of my sister's favorite scriptures was to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That took a whole new meaning to me that day. I had to trust him. I had to trust him that he promised that he could cause all things to work together for good for those who love him. I had to trust him despite what my head wanted to say. Her journey changed me forever. I often go on walks, and I remember shortly after her passing, I went on a walk one day, and I was having these memories of when I used to run track and field in high school. And when you would run a relay race, you would run your part of the race and then you would pass the baton. And it dawned on me one day, that's what she did. She passed that baton on to me. And now it was my turn to take everything that I learned from her and from her journey, whether it was about cancer or our medical system, but most importantly about faith. Now I'm going to take what I've learned, and her story is not ending. I'm going to take that baton and I'm going to run with it, and I'm going to continue on this race. It made me not want to waste time anymore. It made me start listening closer. So now I knew it was my turn to run. We were given 2 beautiful years, because when people say your prayers weren't answered, no, they weren't answered the way that I wanted them to be answered. But I do believe that through our prayers, we were granted 2 extra years that we might not have had. And they were, like I said, beautiful years where we made beautiful memories. It just didn't work the way that I wanted it to. But I know God is still good. And I've learned through this not to focus on the outcome, because that is not where peace is found. Peace is in the one who carries you through when the outcome looks like nothing you imagined. That experience ignited something in me. I, shortly after she passed, launched my podcast, Peaceful Presence Podcast, and I started mentoring others again. I had coached many years ago and been certified in that. But now I wanted to lean into my faith, and knowing that real transformation comes when you draw closer to God and you learn to have a relationship with him and hear what he's saying to you. There's a scripture we've probably all heard that says, with God, all things are possible. But it's taken on a new meaning to me. It's not because of God, all things are possible. It's with him, all things are possible. He and I together, he and me, all things are possible. I even went back and I earned my degree in ministry. And just, when I look back and I see all that I've accomplished as a result of what I walked through with her, it hurts, because I hate to say that it was at her expense. I don't mean it that way, but I just feel like this journey that we're all on, we are going to face trials and tribulations. And if we just continue to lean into God and draw closer to him during those times, He will cause something good to come from it. Doesn't erase the pain, doesn't necessarily make you, happy for these new outcomes, but it does bring a peace. And I know that, no matter what you're walking through, if you're listening to my story today, I know that that's in store for you as well. And now I try to help others who are walking through their own valleys see that a closed door might actually just be an invitation. A heartbreak might just be the place where healing begins. So if that's you and you're listening and you've experienced disappointment, or you prayed for something and it didn't happen, you're not alone. My lesson in this is just like in the Bible where Peter was on the water in a boat, and they hit some rough seas, and he looks into the distance and he sees Jesus walking on water. And Peter says, "Lord, is that you? And if it is, call me to walk towards you." And so Jesus looks at Peter and he says, "Come." And so Peter did. He climbed out of the boat and he began to walk on water. But then Peter looked at the water and he began to sink. And he cries out to the Lord and he says, "Lord, save me." And Jesus did. And Jesus looked at Peter and he said, "Why did you doubt?" And we often we say that the water is our circumstances. And yes, it is. But it's also our outcomes. It's also the outcomes that we think that we want to see. And we think we know how best it needs to go. And I believe that God is sharing through my message right now in this season that He is saying, take your eyes off the water and just fix them on me. And I think that if we learn to do that, that is where true transformation takes place. Whatever it is that you're going through, whatever area of your life that you're struggling with right now, I believe that this is an invitation where He is saying, lean into me and let me do a transformation in you. So my message today is, you don't have to have all the answers, but you can have peace. You can take your eyes off of the outcome that you want, take your eyes off of the water, and then just fix them on the one who calls you to walk on it. Thank you, everyone.